Multilinguals of Reddit, what is your they didn't know I could understand their language story? Not me but my mom's friend. Her and her aunt were on a bus. A very sickly looking woman sat in front of them. They just started talking between themselves and said something along the lines of that lady looks like death. She turned around and in Polish said I have cancer. My grandma could speak Arabic fluently. One time we are out and some women behind us in line are mocking her, calling her tacky, making fun of her bad dye job etc. She turned around and said in Arabic I may be tacky, but at least I'm not stupid enough to assume nobody can understand me. They were so mortified. I speak French, but not completely fluently, although I am a French American citizen. At my first girlfriend's house for the first time eating dinner with them. We go upstairs afterwards and her little sister, 2 grades below us, comes in as we are selecting a movie to watch. Well, they are Canadian and speak French at home a lot. The girl come in and starts talking about how I am cute and so forth to her sister. And then her sister banters back about how she agrees and then turns to me and asks me in French if I agree. I responded in French that I appreciated it. Cue bashful run up to her room. I lived off that high all year. Working at a front desk with 2 co-workers who were related. They are speaking Spanish and one of them is talking about how she thinks I'm weird, act too professional all the time. She then asks where is the stapler? In Spanish. I picked up the stapler and without looking at her I extend my arm to pass it. She then asks if I speak Spanish and understood the whole conversation. I told her I speak fluent Italian and took Spanish classes in school. Another story. At the mall eating McDonald's when I was a teenager. Bunch of old Italian guys hanging around the food court and one asks how can he eat that in Italian. While looking at me, I look up and stare at him. I say because I'm really hungry in Italian. All his buddies started laughing. I'm Mexican but I studied my college degrees in the US. When I was studying abroad in Germany I only spoke English to my German classmates. 4 months in. One time we were waiting for a train at a station and a group of young South American tourists were being loud and just waiting beside us. I could understand every word they are saying, except for some slang, and they suddenly start talking about our group. I don't blame them at all, they were just bored at the train station trying to pass time, but I smile and look at them. One of the guys looks back and says in Spanish, "Do you not like what I'm saying, asshole?" I respond in Spanish. It's been a long time since someone insulted me in my language. The guy has a speechless look on his face and all his friends look at me. We have a laugh and soon after that both our groups sat together and had a nice time talking. Their English was good enough to have small chat with. I was waiting in line with my sister to take a boat tour in California and ahead of us was a group of 5-6 German speaking people. The wait to board the boat was long and they got to talking. At first, it was about how nice the weather was, and then it turned to how annoying Americans can be, especially fat, dumb, tourist Americans. They cracked a couple of jokes having to do with American stereotypes. While this was happening, the line started moving and people started boarding the boat, but the group was too wrapped up in their own jokes to realize it. So I finally turned around to them, and in fluent German asked if they were part of the tour and if they were getting on the boat. They stopped dead in their joking tracks and said yes. So I replied that they had better get a move on, because the dumb, fat, American tourists standing right behind them wanted to get on the boat too. They all looked really embarrassed. Edit. Thank you, kind stranger. My first ever Reddit gold. You made my week. Thank you. I speak fluent Hungarian. And the thing about the language is it's so obscure that Hungarians will always assume when abroad that no one else can understand them. As you can imagine, this can backfire spectacularly. I grew up in the USA, and I've heard marital spats at Walmart that frankly never should have left the living room. Serious goodbyes between lovers that were awkward to hear. All sorts of things like that. The best story in this genre though is my mother's. When she and my dad were enjoying their first Christmas together. They were in a small village in Austria in the early 80s, and for Christmas Eve when they went out to dinner there was a man in the restaurant with a dog sitting at the table, like, guy putting food on the plate in front of his dog eating it, etc. My mom proceeded to spend a lot of time telling my dad how disgusting and unsanitary this was of the guide to do etc. And when Guy and Dog finished their meal he just went up to my parents' table, said Kalam's Karakson ie nepakat kivanog, and left. In Hungarian, this is a polite way of telling a stranger you wish them a Merry Christmas. I speak Dari, one of the two official language of Afghanistan. On a trip I overheard two Afghans. One was telling the other to be careful. Detroit was more dangerous than Kabul. Happened to me actually. Really funny in hindsight. I was in Poland for a holiday with two friends. We went outside a bar to smoke. And I said to my friend, in Dutch, "Those girls over there are really hot. Should we ask them to join us?" One of the girls turned around and said in almost perfect Dutch, "You won't find out if you don't ask." My friends laughing and me standing there flabbergasted. I was touring some old dungeons in Germany. It was just me and my family, and an older German couple. They were kinda dissing my country the whole time, thinking we couldn't understand them. We got to a room where they locked people by their feet and the German man said to his wife and the tour guide in German, "This is where you should go if you can't speak German." I turned to him and in perfect German replied, "Then it's a good thing I can speak German." The look on his face was priceless. Canadian, with an English group in a very French town in northern Quebec. Waitress it talked us, being Anglophones, the whole night to her co-workers and the bartender. She was doing it fairly loudly, which I found weird in a bilingual country. When she came around with the bills I put on my best registered sign B registered sign Cois accent and said in French, "I hope you aren't expecting a tip from these stupid English people, because you sure as hell aren't getting one," and told the group we were leaving. She chased us out of the restaurant screaming at us in French. I flipped her off and we left. Not me, my grandpa, and I apologize if this is among the more morbid stories in the thread. My grandparents were Romanian Jews living in Europe during World War II. Post-war they fled to America via Italy, and lived in Italy for several years. Now, they largely spoke Romanian, but my grandpa could understand Italian as well. My grandma had a variety of serious health issues throughout her life and at this point, they were probably in their 20s. She had to be taken to an Italian doctor, thinking they spoke only Romanian. The doctor told his nurse about my grandma, "She's a Jew, let her die." Well, my grandpa understood this and was able to seek out a more underground doctor to save my grandma's life. She lived into her 80s. When I lived in China I went to an international school so would frequently use English with my classmates even though I understood Chinese. One day, I was walking with a classmate when I overheard these old Chinese ladies talking about how it was obvious we were American because we were so fat. We were both average sized, neither fat nor thin. My friend doesn't understand Chinese so I decided to ignore it since we were just passing by. Later, we were at the fruit stand and the ladies come around looking to buy fruit. I'm standing in front of whatever they were trying to look at and anytime they'd try to move around me I'd shift subtly so they couldn't. I hear one of them start huffing about how she can't get by. And in Chinese I respond with "I'd move but as a fat American it'd do no good." The ladies just looked at me then started laughing and were like, "Ooh, the fat American has good Chinese. No shame." I'm Brazilian, but extremely white and I do look like an American when traveling abroad. I speak Portuguese, English, Spanish and I can understand some French. The most memorable moment of understanding what people are saying when they believe you don't happened to me in Portland, or when I lived there. With all that rain, I became even more white, and I was wearing my Pittsburgh Steelers cap. There was these two Brazilian girls speaking Portuguese in front of me in a line of a Blazers game, and they were being extremely rude to everyone, saying that everyone in America was fat, ugly and full of themselves. So, one of them looked at me and said to the other one, "Bom, esse aqui en Yakuto registered sign Gordon Mfio. Mas aposto que se aca com esse bon registered sign." Well, this one is not fat or ugly, but probably is full of himself with this cap. I just replied, "Obrigado pelos elogios. E cuidado como que vocês falam. Thank you for your compliments. And watch what you're saying." They apologized and got out of the line. At a hot spring in Colorado after a long, relaxing soak, I was walking towards the exit with all of my belongings in my arms when a big yawn took over me. The woman in the closest spring exclaimed, "You should really cover your mouth next time. I thought you were going to eat me." In Polish. Without hesitation, I turned to her and said, "Przepraszam, I'm sorry," and she laughed so hard out of embarrassment that we could hear her all the way to the parking lot. I was on a subway car in Toronto when a French couple were chatting about innocuous crap when the husband starts chatting to his wife about what he wants to do to her. It's graphic. He's going into details about moves, holes, smells. She had a toke in her hand, but unknowingly dropped it. So, I saw my chance. I pick up her hat and tell her that she lost it. Both of their faces went white. She just meekly thanked me. I stood up, got off the subway and felt a sense of glee at having ruined their evening. I'm an American who is fluent in German. This past fall I was studying abroad in Bologna, Italy. I was shopping for food and a German tourist comes up to me and asks if I speak English. I say yes, I'm American. He asks, "Do you know if I can drink a beer in the street? Or are there laws against it?" I'm not sure. I drink outside all of the time and have never had an issue, but to tell you the truth, I don't know if it's illegal. He says thanks, then turns to his friend and says in German, "I have no idea what she just said." So then I say, in German, "I can explain it to you in German if you think you'd understand it better." He was surprised, but we laughed and had a good conversation in German after that. Two English teens on holiday in France started calling people wankers, cunts and many other interesting words. I asked them to start respecting people and they turned red. In Prague I asked a lady something in English and her English was too poor for her to understand. I cannot speak Russian but have learned a bit of it and Czech is pretty close. Her gran was with her and the lady I was talking to said I was an idiot asking stupid questions, so I said in rough Russian, "I'm not an idiot. I'm sorry, I cannot speak Czech." She went red too. In Catalonia, on a market, a seller spotted us as tourists immediately and tried to sell us his dried sausages more expensive than to the Catalan person before. I told him in Catalan that it is not fair to ask us French people to pay more. This actually just happened a couple of days ago. I'm an American traveling abroad in the Middle East and went on a date with an Arab guy. He asked me if I spoke Arabic, but since I'm not comfortable speaking it, I just said no. I can understand most things, though, and can speak if pressed. Dinner was great. We got along well, and then went to smoke shisha at a local cafe. The owner, who was my date's buddy, asked who I was in Arabic. He smiled at me sweetly, squeezed my hand, and told his friend in Arabic, "An American whore who I'm going to duck later." I kept a stupid, docile smile on my face. When the owner took my order, I told him in Arabic and one tea for the American whore who he will not duck later. The look on both of their faces was priceless. Needless to say, I ended up taking a cab home. So, I'm an American, living in the United States. Fluent English. I did take Spanish in high school, and while I didn't really retain much, I can still take a pretty decent gander if I want to. I work in a landscape supply store and most of my customers happen to be Hispanic. Sometimes, they will talk to each other in Spanish while buying materials and I can kind of get the gist of what they're saying. One time, two guys came in and started discussing what materials they were getting and how much. By the time they came up to me, I had already rung them up for what they had been talking about getting. They were really surprised that I understood them and tried talking to me in Spanish. I had to tell them my Spanish was limited, so they tried teaching me a few new words while they finished their transaction. It was a nice time. We did this, but fortunately it wasn't mean. My husband is American born and raised but grew up speaking German with his family. He wanted our kids to be bilingual, so speaks only German with them. My kids and I were at Chincoteague Island in Virginia, where a lot of Amish people like to vacation. We were in line at an ice cream parlor behind a group of about 20 Amish, including 7-18 girls. My daughter is used to speaking German to me as if it's a secret code, and said, "Look at what they are wearing. Those dresses and bonnets. And look at their hair. So thick and shiny. They all look pretty." The girls turned en masse and looked at her in surprise, which in turn surprised her, and I told her, "They clearly understood everything you just said." She looked embarrassed, then shrugged and answered that she didn't say anything she wouldn't have said to their faces. It was still a new experience for her. I was picking up food from a local Mexican place. The lady at the counter asked if I wanted salsa. I said no. The guy behind me said in Spanish that gringos can't handle real Mexican sauce. I turned and said in Spanish, my wife is Mexican. We make our own. The guy didn't say anything. On my way out I heard his friends laugh. My father's story. We were at a Chinese restaurant and my youngest brother, who was about 3, knocked over and broke his cup. The manager and waitress were talking very rudely about my brother's behavior in Mandarin. As he was paying the bill, my dad, who served an LDS mission in Taiwan and continued to use Mandarin in his work, told them to have a good day. They went very red. I'm a white guy who has been living in Singapore for the last 2 years. I speak fluent Mandarin. I hear a lot of people talking about me, but one of the cutest moments was as I was walking out of the train, an older lady looked up at me in shock and said, "Wow, handsome man," to her friend in Mandarin. I replied, "Wow, pretty woman," as we walked by each other. It couldn't have lasted longer than a few seconds. The last thing I saw was her blushing and her friend laughing at her as the doors closed. For an assignment in school, I had to shadow a Hawaiian tattoo artist. This guy was old school, still using turtle shells and tapping the ink into skin. He and his apprentice were speaking in Hawaiian to one another, often mentioning me and the other shadowy. Hawaiian speakers are pretty rare, so I don't blame him for assuming we didn't speak. We would ask questions and write down the answers, so I ended up asking him a question in Hawaiian. He and the apprentice didn't stop tattooing, but they briefly gave each other a very subtle "oh poop" look, and then said in Hawaiian, "We gotta watch what we say now, haha." They were good guys, but a lesson was definitely learned. I'm always amazed that people are rude and foolish enough to assume that someone doesn't speak their language and just blatantly talk it about them right in front of them. I have a fairly boring one. When I was in school, I was 12ish I think. I went on a French exchange. I wasn't very confident in general or in my speaking ability, so I mostly just stayed quiet around my exchange partner and her friends. While we were walking to school with her friend, I listened to their conversation and she told her friend I was stupid and didn't speak any French. It was pretty hurtful, but due to the aforementioned lack of self-confidence, I didn't say anything and just never spoke to her again after the week was over. I'm Austrian. We speak German, but grew up bilingual. Me and a friend used to play this game where we would chat with Austrian guys in a bar pretending to be Americans on a trip through Europe. Sometimes it was hilarious. We usually convinced them we didn't speak a word of German, and when they grew comfortable they'd usually start talking about us, who was hotter, whether or not we'd be up to a night of fun. Some guys talked about their girlfriends wondering if they'd get away with screwing an American they'd never see again. Others were worried we'd be too much to handle. It was genuinely funny most of the time. The best one though was when I asked a guy to say something in German, and he responded with "Ich glaube du bist Österreicherin" equals "I think you're Austrian." It took everything I had not to start laughing. I think he bought it after my non-reaction though. I was in prison in the United States where a lot of people speak Spanish. Fortunately I kept it to myself that I did as well. I was at the table playing poker to make a little money and to pass the time, and a few Latinos were playing as well. They would tell each other their cards in Spanish, then laugh like they weren't talking about cards. Needless to say, this gave me quite the advantage, but things got a little more interesting when they started talking about my win streak. One mentioned to the other that he thought I was cheating and suggested that they don't pay me what they owed, which is a good way to get into a fight in prison. So I calmly said to them in Spanish, "Si no me quieres dinero, tal vez no me digas que son tus cartas." Roughly translated means, if you don't wanna owe me money then you shouldn't tell me your cards. It was such an epic moment, I'll never forget the look on their faces, For those wondering, they did end up paying me, lol. I was in a train and reading and I overheard these two guys in front of me talking in French. I have a cousin who's half French and he taught me a lot of stuff, mainly the curse and 6 words obviously like usual. So from what I heard I was pretty sure they're talking about doing stuff to my boobs. I couldn't obviously understand all of it, but I heard big boobs. Girl, and from the way they were looking at me it was obvious I was right. I just looked at them in their eyes and said, "I know what you're saying." They both turned red and mumbled something, then stayed silent the rest of the ride. I still wonder what exactly they were saying. Probably titty ducking, I don't know.